This is the Parallax podcast, and my name is Tom Amarque. In this mini-series, I interview the Swedish philosopher Alexander Bards on his worldview in general and his book Digital Libido in particular. Alexander Bards is a colorful character, being a proper philosopher, shaman, popstar, and entrepreneur. But as a shaman-philosopher, he looks deeply into our past, present, and future, laying out new narratives on the digital era, which is just now unfolding. In this 5-part mini-series, we will explore some of his core ideas. We start with a general introduction, followed by lectures on the relationship between man and technology, the phallus, spirituality, and power. In which sequence you listen to these episodes is completely up to you. This is a new format. I try to take a back seat and only facilitate guiding questions, so Alexander Bards had all the space to express and reveal his ideas. All the recordings took place in midst of the worldwide corona pandemic, which is quite obvious right now, but could create a context for the listeners in the years to come, because the internet won't forget. So, enjoy this mini-series, and if you indeed enjoyed it, please share it. Alexander, thank you again for coming to this podcast, to this talk about spirituality this time.
Yes.
So, we were talking a lot about sexuality and technological revolutions, and what are your thoughts, like in a most broadest sense? How will our sense of spirituality change in regard of the symbiosis of man and internet and personal algorithms and all this shit? How will the old traditions will come into play here?
Okay, so I'm one of these people who thinks very highly of the word religion, and opposite, not very highly of the word spirituality. So a lot of sort of contemporary Europeans or North Americans will sort of brag and say that, well, I'm not a religious person, but I like to think of myself as a spiritual person. Okay, I feel quite offended when I hear that. So what I mean with that is that I think religion is an incredibly beautiful word. It's the old French religare, meaning what connects people. So it's an old Latin word. And it's nothing to do with God. Please remember that religion in itself, that's theism. So we do theology and theism when we talk about God, but religion itself don't have to have anything to do with God. So religion is a really good word for a practice that is happening within the social realm. So religion is how we more or less control each other in the most transparent way possible in a society. For example, so that we can go through life through our different stages. You and I talked a lot about what it means to be a child and how you become an adolescent, and then you can become an adult, and then you become a woman and a man. You can become a father and a mother, and you can aspire to other things in your life. And at certain stages in your life, you're ready to take those steps. All those mechanisms in any culture are controlled through what we call religion. And there are religious practices, there are rituals. We all do rituals. Even the most ardent atheist will admit that they do tons of rituals every day because they control themselves.
Sure.
And they make the right decisions in their lives, and they focus on the right things through rituals, right? So
based
that is
on
what religion is.
Faith and goodwill and all of that. Yes.
Yeah, it's a good place to start. It's actually to start with the word religion. And our book Syntheism starts, the first sentence in the book is that everything is religion. If it pretends it's not religion, that's when it gets dangerous. So, I'm opposed to the idea that we should separate church and state. I think state becomes religion. Opposed to church, it just becomes another religion when you separate them. And it's better to recognize that. So religion to me is a very, very important thing, and it's a good word. It's a good word to use, and a word Söderqvist and I use all over the place in our work. So then what does spirituality mean? Well, in a sort of vulgar modern sense, it's become part of commercialism. It's become part of capitalist society in the sense that a spirituality is something you pick and choose, something that suits you. So it becomes like a little personal mix of a few crystals here and there, and a few ceremonies you learn to do, and your meditation techniques, and you go from one guru to the next, or you go from one spirituality school to the next, and you pick up little things like if you're some kind of a spirituality supermarket. It's a very American concept of modern spirituality. And of course, this is something I'm not a big fan of, because you're not really aware of who you are, what kind of society you live in when you take that approach to spirituality. To begin with, commercialism in itself should be the first thing you attack if you become a religious person. It's the first thing you should question. Like, okay, what is the pointer in trading this and making money out of this? That's fine in itself, but if it's not honest, if it's not an honest process, then there's something weird and sick about it. And certainly, why wouldn't somebody give something to me with a spiritual value to me? Why would I have to pay for it to begin with? That's a good place to start, right? So I'm allergic to the term spirituality. It doesn't mean we can't use it or shouldn't use it. Rather, we should challenge yourself and say, so is there something about spirituality that don't necessarily have to do with religion? And this goes back to the Axial Age. And the Axial Age is the historical period that starts about 800 years before Christ. So it's following the Bronze Age collapse in the Middle East, which I'm thrilled about. I find that historical period incredibly interesting because I'm a huge fan of the Bronze Age rather than what followed. But during the Axial Age, you and I talked about it before, that Zoroastrianism and Judaism and several other religions were developed before the Axial Age. But during the Axial Age, it was like a golden period of thinking and a golden period of culture that happened from China in the East all the way to Greece in the West and everything in between, over a period starting about 800 years before Christ and running well into about 500 or 600 after Christ. So you got a long period there for over 1,000 years. When we had relative peace in world history, civilization took root. We started using new alphabets that made it easier for us to communicate to much larger audiences, and trade started happening in a new way. And cultures did exchange ideas, and ideas could actually move all the way from China to Greece and back, just like trade goods could during this period. So it's been seen as a very fruitful, creative period. And of course, in Europe, we think this is the period when Greek drama starts. And when we think of culture, we always think of Greek drama as the beginning of culture as we know it in the West. And that's correct. So there's tons of shit that happened that was great during this period. But we've also come to rely too much on the sort of spiritual characters that occur here. I would say the difference between religion and spirituality is very much the difference between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, or the Axial Age that followed it. It was during the Iron Age or the Axial Age that we started to have thinkers who were their own gurus. Like, so the Pillar Saint occurred for the first time in history. So you'd have these guys who walk out in the forest, and they wouldn't be shamans who did tricky, weird things in the forest any longer. They'd rather sit on a pillar somewhere, and they would then proclaim their faiths or their teachings or whatever, and have followers who follow them. And of course, we see this pattern because we know Christ as a figure in the West. We know the Buddha as a figure from this period. Lao Tzu and Taoism in China starts during this period. Jainism came out of this period. So, and of course, you had further interpretations of older teachings as well that were explored through different teachers. But the idea of a spiritual teacher who is this lonely guy who you follow, the guru, starts during the Axial Age. We don't see any traces of that before.
Right.
So I think to begin with, we can't read religion afterwards as a spiritual exercise when it wasn't. Religion should be perceived as a religious practice, religious exercise. It should be understood as something way older, much more, profound for humanity and spirituality, where spirituality only happens during periods of relative peace and prosperity. You have a large population increase, and you have plenty of food for people, and you can afford the luxury of having gurus around who proclaim weird ideas like, I'm a Gnostic, like spirit should be separate from body, and spirit should be perceived as being much higher and more noble than awful, horrible body, and the awful, horrible body and the awful, horrible world of material things. We must get away from that and extract our spirits and make our spirits free and beautiful and wonderful and not being dependent on the physical. And all these ideas occur during the Axial Age. And we associate spirituality very much with that period.
Right.
So I think, the way two of my favorite German philosophers are Horkheimer and Adorno and the Frankfurt School from the 1930s and the 1940s. And in the 1940s, when the Nazi regime was at its peak in Germany, Horkheimer and Adorno wrote a beautiful book called The Dialectics of Enlightenment. So they went back and looked at the Enlightenment period of the 17th century and forward in Europe and made it responsible for what happened later. It saw figures like Hitler and Stalin being built into what later materialized, which, of course, a very relevant critique coming from German Jews in the 1940s. But I would say, if you take their ideas that we need to reread history and understand it better and maybe tear down a few heroes and build some other more proper heroes instead, I think what we need to do on a worldwide basis over the next, say, 30 to 50 years is, number one, to rewrite the history of Asia. Because Asia is the center of the world, for God's sake. That's where the vast majority of people live. That's where the vast majority of people have always lived. That's where you find civilizations that are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years old. The majority of mankind and whatever they achieved comes out of Asia. And the history of Asia is a sloppy European fantasy from the 19th century, the way you perceived it so far. So I think it needs to be reformulated. I think Asians, especially Asians who live in America and Europe today, are perfectly adapted, rewriting the history of Asia. And I think that could be a wonderful achievement. And by doing that, we can start looking at history deeper and go back maybe 5,000 to 6,000 years properly, rather than just start 800 before Christ. I said that everything that means anything to us today started then. And that was the golden age of spiritual teachers and political ideologists, and everything we do in terms of religion and politics and everything later starts with Indians and Chinese and Greeks who thought during this period and proclaimed their teachings. Because I think if we're going to really take on Christianity and Islam and question their faults and defects and look at a deeper understanding of religion, which, as you and I talked about before, means going back to primarily Zoroastrianism and Judaism in the West, and go back to deep Hinduism and deep Taoism and Buddhism in Asia, I think it would be really worthwhile to go beneath the Axial Age and go deeper. And that means taking spirituality back into religion where it should be.
Okay. So, I think we both agree that, the commercialized spirituality, this kind of Mickey Mouse understanding of crystals and the use of crystals and tarot cards and all that shit, we don't need to talk about that. There's another strand of spirituality coming from, say, the American Ken Wilber kind of thinking, where it has more to do with, certain practices to achieve certain states and certain levels of consciousness. So how does that come into play in your understanding of religion and spirituality?
Well, number one, we should not only hold American capitalism responsible for the spirituality fashion that's going on at the moment. No, I think existentialism in the world of philosophy, and even some of my favorite thinkers were existentialists, like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and Heidegger. But the way existentialism was later reproduced in the 20th century with Sartre and other guys, it became a very individual experience. It's just like it's about you and your own internal experience of yourself, and what does it mean to have a self and all that. For me, this all goes back to Descartes and Cartesian individualism. And
right.
If there's anything that unifies American commercial culture and unifies European philosophy at its worst, it is Cartesian individualism. So we should just state that first, that for me,
you're saying
spiritual pursuit. Yeah. So take Ken Wilber, for example, as an advisor to you to achieve higher states of consciousness or to understand the world better through different techniques and things like that. Yes, that's partly true. Besides studying, which is something you cannot escape from, you need to also meditate and have spiritual practices, and hopefully you will achieve something from that. But the self-indulgence involved in so many of these practices is what we need to watch out for, because Just like if you go into deep shamanic practices, there is no point ever in taking psychedelics without you having a proper intention first of why you're doing it. Then it might turn out to be a different experience than what you expected. That means you also need an integration afterwards. But the point with the whole process in deep shamanic practices, and this is like back tens of thousands of years, like the whole point with intention, ceremony, and integration, where ceremony is the least important of the three, is that can also be applied on when you search for, say, self-transcendence. So self-transcendence is a common axial age ideal. It's common in Buddhism, it's common in Christianity, it's common in most of the Taoism, most of the religious practices that came out of the axial age were very centered on you as an individual. So Cartesian individualism only comes out of Christianity and the Gnostic dualism, the foundation of Christianity. With Christianity, Descartes would never have been possible. So Descartes and Kant and a lot of Western philosophy in the Enlightenment and forward just inherits from Christianity a certain Gnostic dualism that's prevalent during the axial age. That means, what is the point in you trying to explore a spiritual path and working hard on your studies and learning lots of techniques and maybe having a mentor who teaches you how to be a deeply spiritual person? What is the point with all this? Because if the point is only that you should feel superior compared to people around you, then you're there for all the wrong reasons. And this is why Zoroastrians, which is my religion, are so skeptical of monks and nuns and people who take their spirituality so seriously that they intend to do it full time.
Right.
In Zoroastrianism, you're supposed to have a day job. Don't quit your day job literally, because you become more spiritual according to Zoroastrianism if you have a proper job.
Right.
And if you contribute to society and get a proper salary for your job, because then you can take on spirituality in a meaningful way, where it adds value to life. You're already being a contributive participant in society as a whole. And for me, this is something I sort of, when I converted to Zoroastrianism in 1992, this was something I wasn't very interested in. I found it disturbing because I was always obsessed with the idea of becoming a monk and being spiritual, and locking myself up in a monastery with some friends, with some monks and nuns, and taking our spirituality seriously and becoming deeply spiritual people. And I certainly read Ken Wilber at the time too, and he's great. I still think Wilber is great, but it's all about what is your intention with doing this and going through this, and that's where you need to watch out, because I think a good test is sexuality. Okay. So I always recommend people that you can't trust a person who doesn't have his sexuality in order.
Sure. Mm.
And what I mean with that is actually a deeply spiritual question, because if you haven't taken care of your sexuality, which will take you over in any case, like it will control you. It's the beast of nature inside of you that you cannot escape from. So, and that goes for both women and men equally. So if you deal with your sexuality, for example, through Tantra, and you're open about it and transparent about it, that's the point. The point is not to control it. The point is not to enjoy it more. The point with dealing spiritually with sexuality is to contain it so you can be open and transparent towards other people about yourself. That's what Tantra is about. And what you're discovering, people who do Tantra properly, is that you suddenly arrive with these women and one you can trust completely. Why? Because they got their sexuality in order. They know what's going on. They can contain it. And I think that's a good example of doing spirituality, because the purpose here is not to enjoy sexuality more. The purpose is not to get the best out of it. The purpose is not to let it roam free either. The purpose is to know it, to understand it deeper, not for sexuality itself, but to thereby, because it is everything you want in your life. Your whole willpower is sexual, right? So by controlling and understanding your libido, you can afford to be open and transparent towards other people. And that, I would say, is a requirement for creating a genuinely spiritual community. Otherwise, any regular hospital or any regular place that takes care of people, a care home or anything like that, is more spiritual to me than a personal spiritual practice. Because if it's all about you making yourself superior to others or superior to your former self, which I think is one of the worst things people could go into, that idea is just scary. No, No, it is about how you can perfect your own willingness to contribute to your community. That is genuine spiritual practice.
Let us please indulge me for a moment, because I want to tie this in to something you mentioned before, intention, right? And so we were talking also about Wilber and states, and I was long under the impression that, and you mentioned Descartes and the idea of the individual, and we already talked about this, that the deconstruction of the ego, of the individual self, is kind of the highest goal in spirituality. So you have like this word like non-duality and the void and everything. And then I read your book, and you talked about the mamilla, and you let yourself go to the void. And gradually I was learning that, that's not the final stage of spiritual realization. The next stage is kind of, you bring that back into the world with intention for your community and for all of that. And you can leave your addiction to the deconstruction and to the non-duality. You have to leave that behind at some point. And so that, for me, that was kind of, because you have this duality, we talked about this mamilla and phallus, and so you bring the male energy, the male spirituality to the world. So, and I want to reflect that back to you. So I think this intention is very important for, and the contribution to society for spirituality, way more than deconstructive non-duality.
Oh yeah, exactly. This is the critique of the pillar saint. You and I talked before about the boy pharaoh. And if the boy pharaoh is the distortion of the chieftain, so it's an 11-year-old boy who pretends he's the king, then the pillar saint is in the same way, the 11-year-old distortion of the proper priest, right? So the pillar saint and the boy pharaoh are two expressions I will use in the new book I'm working on right now with Sedicus. I think they're brilliant expressions of where it goes wrong. Or like I say, oh, you're going to Bali this winter to get rid of your ego? Oh, funny, the Bali is the place with the most egos in the world.
Right.
Because the harder you try to get rid of your ego, the more obsessed you will be with the ego that tries to get rid of itself, right? The void, finding out there's a void at the center of your ego, is just finding out how the self operates. It's precisely because there's something there that you can't fill, that there is a sense of self to begin with. That's fundamental psychoanalysis. So rather than being obsessed with changing yourself, the word I'm using here, and this is a word I'm very critical when it comes to John Vervaeke, for example, in his work, because as a psychologist and a cognitive scientist, he goes towards this term called self-transcendence, and he still says he doesn't like Gnostics. And I'm like, the only people who talk about self-transcendence are Gnostics, because how would you transcend from a self to some other self within yourself without strengthening your ego rather than putting it in its proper place?
Right.
So the only way you can get the ego in its right place, and it should be there, is by letting the ego serve.
Right.
And both women and men do this. And this is why we talk in Digital Libido, we talk about the inner circuit and the outer circuit.
Right.
Because for 95% of women and for 95% of men, those two circuits make sense. The inner circuit, the most beautiful word there is the word care.
The inner circle would be the matriarch. You have to add this.
Yes, the matriarchy. The matriarchy, ruled by the older women who are wise and have lived a long life, so they know what womanhood is about. And it allows the daughter to mimic the mother and become a great mother herself. It allows the younger woman to mimic the older woman and become an older woman or a matriarch herself when she gets older. So whether you take part in the child rearing or not, you are taking part in the eternal return of the same, in circular time, in the most beautiful, wonderful, foundational setting for human life. We come out of the womb, and when we die, we return to the womb. The female body is the symbol of the beginning and the end of our own lives and our society and of history. So this is fundamental. That's why the female is the origin, and the masculine can only become an exception to the female, to the feminine. That is Taoism, that is Zoroastrianism. Any teaching will teach you that. It's sort of fundamental for nomadology, as you and I talk about. So only then can we strive towards the phallus. The mamilla represents the support system we need as human beings, because we have a very long childhood, because we're going to grow big brains and hopefully be intelligent when we get older, to be able to contribute to the largest possible flock of any flock animal, which is human society. So to be able to be contributive human beings and live full lives as grown-ups, we need to be on the right path of this journey. And this is the journey that we, according to Freud, call the journey from the mamilla towards the phallus. And this is where the phallic energy comes in. The phallic energy is the ambition to do things slightly differently and therefore hopefully with some kind of improvement.
Right.
So that's eventology, and that's the phallic. And that is tied to the outer circuit. Because when you think about men, what they have traditionally done is like they've gone into warfare, they've done hunting, they've done more physical stuff, they've traveled over much larger areas than women generally do, because women have smaller bodies, and women are also carrying children and often elderly people with them. So the men could travel over much larger areas. So you would have sections of men who worked over much larger areas in all climate zones. Everywhere we see this pattern. That's what we call the outer circle. That's what the majority of men are fine. So to find your own female archetype or your own male archetype means finding your own place on this map, so you can be the kind of woman or the kind of man that you were born to be. And that is the realization of the self. It's not the transcendence of the self. The only transcendence I'm interested in my work is basically accept that you will die one day. Because that ultimately what transcendence is. Transcendence is that you die and you leave society, or you leave the sociant, or you leave the tribe to the next generation to take over and run as they see fit, right? So let me to be able to accept that. Yeah. So that's the real transcendence. Any other transcendence, just moving from child to adult or something like that. It's a natural thing you should do. But what you're more interested in than transcendence itself, acceptance of your archetype, to fulfill your archetype. That is your true journey towards your own self.
Respectively, if you are a woman or a man, pertaining to the inner circle, to the outer circle.
And again, for the majority. So right. We have a space for androgynous caste. These are the people who go in between, certainly gays and lesbians and all kinds of people who feel that, and we also have the shamanic caste, which is a small percentage of people who are basically outside of this game altogether. And they're the ultimate risk takers. But, yeah.
But wouldn't you at the same time agree that, say, let's say we use a very broad understanding of what spirituality is, that if you look at the scenery today, that it is very inner circle driven, like you talked about care. It's about deconstruction of the ego. It's like the spirituality that we face right now. It's a very feminine spirituality and not a very, outer circle spirituality, for lack of a better word. And so isn't that a problem? Isn't that a problem for the outer circle participants, that they only have like models and role models like from the inner circle? Or wouldn't you agree with that assessment?
Well, we've had a problem in the West in the fact that we separated church and state 1600 years ago. And I'm adamant about this. That means that taking the state away from the church and letting the state be its own operation, which in itself is not a bad idea. It's again, chieftain and priest must be separated. But the state itself should be seen as religion. And maybe here, it's precisely where you and I started this discussion, is that when we talk about spirituality, we also need to talk about religion. And I would say the religion is the masculine and spirituality is the feminine. Because then you and I can allow a lot of contemporary spirituality to be exactly what it is. I don't have a problem with contemporary spirituality. I have a problem with what's lacking, what's not there.
Right.
And because contemporary spirituality is all bit about your own personal journey in a very feminine way. Like it's your own personal journey and your own self-improvement and your own self-transcendence. And it's all about tripping on your own damn ego at the end of the day anyway. And when you say your ego is gone, it's probably back bigger than ever at the back of the head. So it's a compensational behavior for something that's not being properly treated. Was not being properly treated. It's not to attack spirituality the way we try to avoid attacking Buddhism and Christianity, although they are feminine, especially feminine religions and the magical religions. It's rather better to look at what's lacking in Buddhist and Christian societies. And that's when we arrive at Confucianism which should have been described as religion all along, becomes problematic in China today when China is a communist dictatorship. It's a Confucian dictatorship. At the same time, we have a major problem with the West, because in the West over the last 400 years, we had states and markets that were not controlled through religion that plundered the planet. And the West is solely responsible for the climate catastrophe we're in right now. So that's precisely what happens when you have large powers basically running amok in nature and culture without being contained by religion. So I think a good place to start is to say, why don't we take back the word religion and force people to talk about spirituality, especially the people who say, oh, I don't like religion, but I like spirituality. I don't think of myself as a religious person, but a spiritual person. To me, that is superficial right there. That's what no, wait a second. If you're spiritual but not religious, then you're just basically a self-obsessed Cartesian individual running around in a spirituality supermarket going after guru after guru after guru. And they go like, yeah, how would you know? It's just like, well, that's what you must not do, because that's spirituality devoid of religion. You can go back into spiritual practice. You can do your meditation. You can go to your gurus. You can pick up all these things. I'm perfectly happy if you go to Bali to learn some tantra, whatever you go to do there. But you got to put it in the context where religion is also included. That means you got to be socially responsible. That means you got to go home and take responsibility for politics that's happening in your society. Why don't you become involved as a political activist? Why don't you start to look at society with a form of systemic critique of society? What is wrong with the society we live in? How could it be improved and be better? And what can we learn from history? And what can we learn from other cultures? And how can we actually reread history and reinterpret history to better understand ourselves where we're at right now? That is being religious. And I can't
but
see,
where's the
I can
difference
see any
to
point in
ethics
being
then?
spiritual if you're not religious, right?
Where's the difference to like to ethics? Because, you know, of course, I completely agree that we can and should engage with the world, but you don't need a term like religion to have this kind of understanding of what you should do in society to engage with it. So what is the extra element which distinguishes religion from ethics?
Okay, that's where I would disagree. I think the modern stance that you can be ethical without being religious is ridiculous. No, you can't. I think that's fake. And if there's one thing I hate, it's humanism. So did Nietzsche. And what I mean with that is that if you try to keep Christianity without Christianity, so you say you don't believe that Christ rose up from the dead after 3 days. You don't believe the foundational myths of Christianity that are actually required for you to call yourself a Christian. You know, the things people have believed in Christian churches for the last 2,000 years, regardless of whether they're Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox. Undeniably, there are tons of shit that Christians believe. Now, if you don't believe these things, you're clearly not a Christian. And try to reinterpret Christianity after 2,000 years and claim it's something different because you, as an individual, has come up with something different. Well, then give it your own name and an ism at the end, but don't call it Christianity. So if you want to keep the best parts of Christianity that you like, please note that I said like rather than having researched, then you take away the roof of the house, you take away even the walls of the house, but you ignore the basement. Now that's cheating. And that's exactly why I'm so skeptical of the Enlightenment philosophers that try to save Christianity by taking the best out of it, but not understanding the necessary foundation. Ethics has to be based on something that you cannot rock. You cannot change it. And for me, ethics, for example, Zoroastrian ethics, which I think is fantastic. You go through 3 different phases. You go through a phase called be aware of how you think, then become aware of how you express yourself, what you say, because you go from imaginary to symbolic, and then be aware of how you express that through your body, because then you move into the real. So, because also how you act today, we call this truth as an actor of philosophy. How you act today is your truth. It will specify for you who you are, and your actions today will then shape how you think about yourself, your relation to the outside world tomorrow morning.
Sure.
And then becomes the loop. Now, ethics to me is basically look at that loop and look at yourself as an individual who's interacting with the world, and then ask yourself, how could you improve on this process to be more contributive? Because if you also become more contributive, you'll funny enough be happier about yourself, because it's just a human payback system. If you contribute more to the community you belong to, and you do so in a constructive and creative way, you'll get feedback loops that will reward you. Your whole reward system will probably kick in and reward you for it. It's just human. That is not humanism, though. That's just understanding fundamental logic and fundamental biology, and then applying that and turning that into ethics. But that in itself is exactly what religion is. That's the ethos of religion rather than the mythos or the logos.
Right.
That is deeply religious. It's through religion that we learn what is the right thing to do. So I can be the person I would want to be. See, if I'm lucky enough to live a long life, I can lie on my deathbed and say, I did what I could do. I did my best. And I'm happy and I'm proud of it. And I was lucky, right? That's the ultimate goal. In Zoroastrianism, that's called harvata, to reach the state of harvata, of wholeness and fullness, to have lived a full human life, to them say, okay, I've lived a full life. I'm ready to let go and let somebody else take over and live instead of me. And that is transcendence in Zoroastrianism. And that is great ethics, right? I don't know any other better ethical system. Even the Jews and the Ten Commandments, to me, is too much of the worship of the law itself. You geared yourself away too much from the chieftain and too much towards the priest. You let the rabbi take over society. That is my problem with Judaism. Although you can do it, you have Judaism created on that basis. But you get a religion that's obsessed with following the law at all times in a literal sense. That's what Judaism does all the time, right? So that's the problem. I prefer a more relaxed attitude to stay between the chieftain and sorry about that, to stay between the chieftain and the priest if you're a man, and then back off and let the chieftain priest division of the phallus lead you and guide you so you can be matriarchal and make sure that everybody follows.
Right.
That is the fundamental phallic and matriarchal approach to spirituality and religion.
Right. So that ties perfectly in with the question I had in mind. So speaking about finding and expressing, like recognizing and speaking and acting like your archetype in an outer inner circle. Let's focus on the outer circle. Like, how do you do that? How do you recognize and speak and act out your archetype? So what are the religious practices you use or society uses?
Well, to begin with, we mimic. And we love when children do it because that's how children learn how to be grown-ups. So children want to be grown-ups as quickly as possible, and they want to have the power and the influence that grown-ups have. And the way they do it is that they mimic. They look at you and they try to do what you do, and they love doing that. So they play around and they play grown-ups all the time, right? We do that as grown-ups too. So what is important here, there's a beautiful word I found recently called archetype. An archetype is the person who mimics the archetype to become the archetype. So it's like you're a disciple. Now, we do this all the time. So what is important is to reflect yourself as a man or a woman to your surroundings and have people around you and see what kind of man or what kind of woman are you. And don't look for challenges there. Don't look for what you have to work on all the time and what your superego tells you must work on and where you don't feel fit. Rather look at what you do with such ease that it takes very little effort for you to do it. Just be kind to yourself there. So your archetype, your primary archetype, is what you find when you just do things very easily and other people go, wow, how did you do that? And you go, well, this is nothing. You know, it's just like I can sweep a chimney, or I can read a book, or I can run fast, or I can eat eggs, or whatever. Whatever you do it easily. And the things you do easily are a good place to start to find your archetype, because it shouldn't be too much effort involved in finding it. Then you can find a secondary archetype if you want to go into more effort and more challenges. That's where it takes an effort from you to do it, a real tough effort. But you can do it if it's needed. And that's good to know, because it will give you self-confidence knowing that, okay, for example, you know a lot about medicine, but you're not a medical doctor. So you suddenly end up in a room and an emergency happens and there are no doctors there. And you say, listen, I'm not a doctor. I'm a big fan of medicine. So I'm like a pseudo-doctor, an amateur doctor. And people go, okay, great, secondary archetype. That means you're the best thing we have right now to try to solve this acute problem.
Right.
And that's what secondary archetypes are for. So I think for most, especially young men who come to me, and young women for that matter, I always advise them, find your primary archetype and don't look in those places where your superego tells you to look, but rather look at where the ego can let go of the superego and do its own thing, and where other people around you say, this is what you're good at. So it's not about you fantasizing about who you should be.
But what you do effortless and achieve effortless.
Yeah. There's so many people who send their music to me all the time who want to be rock stars because I was a rock star in the past. And I said, listen, if you don't have enough talent even to listen to your own music and judge whether it's good or bad, then you definitely don't have talent. Right. The first thing I knew when I became a rock star was I had the talent to listen to my own music and be critical of it and know when I needed to work on it or when I should just release it, right?
Right.
That's the number one thing in archetypal talent, is that as an archetype, you know exactly what you're good at, and you know exactly where to stop and say, this is no longer my area of expertise, somebody else needs to take over.
Can you give a give a concrete example how easiness and effortlessness ties in with a certain archetype? Like you talked about the chieftain and the priest and stuff like that.
Okay.
So how could that look like practically?
So I meet somebody who's got musical talent, clearly has musical talent. And they're great at playing the piano, but they insist they also want to sing. And they take singing lessons. And they work really hard on it. And they come back to me and say, I'm a singer. And by the way, I play the piano. And I'm just like, okay, if I ask your friends, would they call you a singer or a piano player? And they go, well, okay, I've made it. My friends would call me a piano player. Good. Can we please find somebody who can sing well so you can play the piano? And then you can have a band together. That is a very, very easy way of moving people away from individuality, make themselves individual, and see themselves as part of a larger game.
So what would be the archetype in that case?
The archetype will be the piano player in the band, where somebody else would have the archetype to be the singer. And maybe the piano player sings well enough to do backing vocals, right? So by finding your archetype in that way, this is where most young people have a problem all the time, because they're basically told when they're 17 years old, you can be anything you want. That is one of the major dysfunctionalities of society today. You know perfectly well that in Digital Libido, we write about that infantility is the major problem. Infantilism is the major problem of the Western world since the 1950s and forward. Because after the Second World War, we trained everybody they could be anything they wanted. This is the hippie myth. It's like, so you're still told when you're 17 years old, you can be anything you want, and you must pick your education, and when you look forward into the future, you just dream and be any dream you want. And then between 17 and 23, these kids knock into so many walls they were unprepared for. And they're so cynical when they're 23, they've accepted that I can hardly be anything, but maybe I can be this. Which is not where you wanted them to be in the first place, because then their super egos take it over completely. And then you have to put them together and say, listen, you probably got a couple of really good archetypes playing around here, a couple of things you're really good at, and I'm sure one of them could be your profession. You could build a career in it, and you could be the perfect partner for somebody in a relationship. You could even be a parent as you go along. You can live a really fulfilling, fantastic life, and even be a teacher at your archetype later in your life. You just need to find it. And you don't find it by dreaming and fantasizing about it, because then society outside of you will grab you and as a super ego will put its injunction on you and tell you what you must strive for. And that's the everybody wants to be a football player or a rock star at that stage. Rather is looking at the beauty of being able to contribute something that is really valued in society, which, for example, a paycheck is evidence of, so you can take on that archetype. When you look at your life that way, and people who are successful, and you look up to people who are 40, 50 years old, are successful, they're the ones who knew this from day one, who taught this when they were kids, and when they grew up, they realized they had specific archetypes, and these are the very people who take pride in their profession, for example.
Right.
That's something you do when you've found, and you've achieved, and you pulled through, and you explore your archetype.
Now a subsequent question. Does every effortless expressed archetype necessarily means that you are socially successful?
No, there's no guarantee that, and that's what you shouldn't strive for. What I mean with that is that
let me say that, because there's a meme going around with it's called the ikigai. So it's called, what you're good at, what's easy to coming to you, what society needs, and, what society is paying for. And it's like this Venn diagram that if you have like all four elements, then you have like your personal archetype. And I'm always wondering, because it's not, that's not realistic. It's like you can't, it isn't mandatory that your archetype is that what the society needs right now? There are so many examples in history where people were discovered long after they were dead or something like that.
Oh, yeah. That's why being socially successful is not something you should strive for if you can avoid it. What I mean is that you reach your archetype through reflecting yourself through others rather than fantasizing about it yourself. Having a few friends over for dinner and just openly asking them when you're 18 years old that, what do you guys think I should study? Where would I find something that's both challenging to me, but it also plays into my strengths so I can be even better at what I'm already good at, right? That's your archetype. So I think it's valuable, but it doesn't mean that you should ask other people so they would applaud you or they would make you socially. Because any given society at any time will reward certain archetypes but not reward others.
Right.
A perfect example of that is when you get a pandemic, right? You have a pandemic pulling through society. Suddenly we start valuing doctors and nurses much more than we did in the past. And then we value them for a few more years after that until we forget about the pandemic and then we value them less. So the archetypes are almost socially most valued when they're most needed.
Right.
And that means if your archetype was something that human society needed desperately 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, but it's hard for you to express this archetype today and at least get paid for it, you've got a problem. You do. And I think it's more honest and sincere to admit that. And that's again where religion comes in, because the work of religion is about getting a place for your archetype in the society which you live in so that you can successfully, in a contemporary setting, contribute, right? That's hard spiritual work to get there. But my point here is that before we even speak about spirituality in the sense of, I went to Bali and went to see this guru and I meditated and took drugs and I found myself. No, that's not how you find yourself. You find yourself by interacting with human beings in a very Heideggerian way. And it's through finding your own archetype and then being an archetype who can mimic and train by looking at other archetypes that are older than you,
right,
but of the same personality that you are. That's you become really good at what you do. That is what learning really is.
Right.
And understanding these mechanisms, I think, is a great way of getting back to genuine spirituality rather than the commercial, superficial version of it.
Right. So, I mean, philosophically speaking, there is this figure that always appears with Socrates and with Nietzsche and with, lots of philosophers, and that's the figure of the archetype of the daimon, or the daemon, the positive force, the genius, psychologically speaking, the higher self, or whatever you call it. So, but from your point of view, psychologically speaking, like where does it come from? What is that, an archetype? Like psychologically speaking, like it's because you have the superficial array of behaviors, right? You have the super ego coming and conditioned realm of behaviors, but then there's supposed to be something deeper, some guiding force, like a medium between you and God. Something, like the archetype. And so from your point of view, how would you describe it? How would you approach that?
Well, the name of the archetype that stands between you and God is the priest. So we let the priest talk to the gods, and we can talk to the lesser gods. The lesser gods are priests, and their forefathers and their foremothers and idols and icons and all kinds of figures that we human beings feel have access to. There are like older brothers or older sisters or parents to us that we look up to and identify with. And of course, your own archetype works the same way. The teacher you've got or the mentor you have, who you are the archetype to, but who you put the archetype on, is again a lesser god. It's a great expression, lesser gods. Lesser gods are basically idols and icons we look up to learn from and mimic. And that's necessary for us as human beings. But to speak directly to God, God is such an abstract thing that why would any one of us speak directly to God? This is where I'm deeply critical of Christianity and Islam in the idea that direct access to God would be desirable. To begin with, why would God want to speak with us? He'd be bored to death, right? We'd all be the same, billions of us. So no, not at all. The most schizophrenic, weirdest thing ever would be that God talked to all human beings. It's just ridiculous. So this is what I have against Christianity and Islam, is that the Bard absolute, this thing between human beings and God that exists in all the other religions, in Hinduism and Zoroastrianism and in Taoism and certainly in Judaism, I think is beautiful. And I think that needs to be reinstated. And I think it belongs to the separation of church and state that caused so much havoc in the West as well. I think both these two things need to be attacked and questioned. And it's about time after 2,000 years of Christianity that we go back and reinstate the Bard absolute as this thing that is between God and man.
But I mean, like, do you think like the archetype is a pattern, say, like a social pattern of behavior, or is it a psychological entity, or is it both?
Oh, it's definitely deeply personal. It is psychological and biological. We are different. Okay. So human beings are born to be parts of a flock. And it seems like since all women seem to be equally inclined to, for example, have gay kids, it doesn't seem that there's certain women who give birth to gay babies and certain women who only give birth to straight babies, but rather gayness and things like that are evenly spread. Then you can take that with all the archetypes, and it turns out all the archetypes are pretty evenly spread over the general population. I can go to southern China, and I can go to Greenland, and I can go to Brazil, and I can study 3 totally different communities that haven't been in touch with each other for at least the last 40,000 years. And I can then see the same patterns. For example, the number of kids who show engineering skills early are equal. The number of kids who show priestly skills are equal. The number of kids who show caring skills to become great doctors and nurses are equal. So in a larger population of, say, a few thousand people from anywhere in the world that we study, we discover that these archetypes that are essential to human society turn up in equal numbers. That means we all have the same origin. That also means that all these different tribes in these different populations we are now across the planet had a shared origin, and we shared that origin for a long period of time, long enough for biology and evolution to shape us into the kind of humans we are today. And that's exactly where we find patterns that are, mostly masculine, outer circuit patterns. We find patterns that are mostly feminine, inner circuit patterns. And we have the exceptions that we call androgynous caste and shamanic caste personalities. But we can fit all human personality types, even psychopaths, to be honest about it. We can fit all human personality types into this pattern. And we can find purposes and contributing roles for almost all of them, even in the modern setting. God knows for how long, but we can. And I think that's what we should aim for. And to me, this is not humanism. This is rather biologism. This is rather evolutionism. This is rather recognizing that the sociontology of human beings, the origin of an original tribe in which we lived for at least 60 to 70,000 years, and that shaped the genes we have today, and very, very little has happened to us biologically over the last 3,000 or 4,000 years when we had civilization, means that this is where we should go next, to explore what it means to be human, and then transfer that to contemporary society and the relationship between man and technology and a globalized world that we live in, and then just realize, okay, we've got to maintain this planet, we've got to make it work. We also must not kill strangers to the extent we've done in the past. We must prevent pandemics and other problems too. So we got to solve all these problems, and we have these ideologies. We call it utopianism, cosmopolitanism, syntheism. We work with these different ideas that are ways on how we could achieve this. And all of this, to me, is religion.
Right.
We're all working religion. And if I use the word spirituality in a positive, creative sense with somebody, it would only be about their own individual journey or the journey of, the next to kin, they're most close to the people they care about the most, say your family or your closest friends. So what would be the exercise you and these people would do together to achieve your archetype and to go fully into that archetype and explore it and expand it and do whatever you could do with it and do something even more with than was done in the past, because they become eventological about your archetype? Why not? Now, if you could do all those things during your life, that means you've gone religious, and you can then say that you've also taken your spirituality seriously. Because without that context, spirituality means nothing. It's like, I always talk about an Aristotelian Renaissance here. And what we say with the Aristotelian Renaissance is precisely Aristotle's opposition to Plato, when Aristotle basically says, Plato, you're great with all your beautiful ideas, but since your ideas don't know where they're going to arrive and what kind of context you're going to put them in, they're useless. anybody who plants a flower knows that once you put that seed into the earth, you better have prepared that earth so it's optimal for that seed to grow into a beautiful flower. Otherwise, you're never going to have a beautiful flower. If you just put that seed into sand and never put water on it, then you don't understand context. Understanding context is, where is this idea going to arrive and how can it be used in that environment when it arrives? This is, again, religion rather than spirituality. So spiritual practice is basically, that's my own religious practice in the sense that I want to be part of this. I want to be a contributive citizen of the site I live in, or the community I belong to, or the congregation that I acknowledge that I share beliefs with. So once you decide which one of these tribal contexts you're going to be part of, it is that context that decides how you use your archetype, not you.
Right. So you mentioned the psychopath as far as I understood it, like a biological necessity for the tribe. Did I get that correct?
Careful with necessity, but
Yeah, because you mentioned in the book Digital Libido that there is a stable percentage of the population who is like queer or gay, and that is actually to the benefit of the whole tribe. So you have like a distribution of archetypes which is beneficial to the tribe as a whole.
Yeah, we need gays and lesbians desperately because a certain idea called heterosexuality turns out to be very popular. And because people want to practice the heterosexuality in all kinds of permanent forms and, make it permanent and long-lasting, they run into tons of problems. And that's why there's an industry for gays and lesbians just to take care of heterosexual couples who fail at their dreams. So that's easy. Now, psychopathologies are, if you're aware of who has a psychopathology, I'm sure you can use it. And certainly any officer in the army you talk to has, number one, in the army, cannon fodder is usually useful. So you can certainly use people that are totally determined, unemotional, totally determined about something they're obsessed with, they would achieve it. And that is, to me, what psychopathologists deal with. So what we're saying, essentially, in Digital Libido, is saying that everybody who's alive today is a winner in the sense that you are around and you withstood evolution, your genes did, and your parents multiplied, and you're here. So a good starting point is then to say that, okay, that means you could recognize the fact that at least in the past, you have a specific archetype that was valued. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been married. Nobody would have fucked with your parents. You wouldn't be here today. So that's a good starting point, actually, to say that evolution has brought you here. And because evolution brought you here, and we've had tough times in the past, that your genes survived, then that's a good starting point for self-confidence, right?
Right.
But then the question comes, is there in your archetype or your set of archetypes, is there a pattern here that's useful in society today where you can contribute? And how could you maximize and optimize that?
So that strangely sounds like natural selection for archetypes.
Yeah. Oh, they're tied together, definitely. And this is what I mean with an ethics coming out of biology and coming out of history and coming out of evolution. We can certainly create an ethics based on that, but that in itself is religious ethics. I wouldn't say you can do ethics without religion. I would be very, very skeptical anybody who claimed that. I don't think they understand what religion is. They don't understand what ethos is. They don't understand what proper values are. And I would immediately suspect that somebody who said they had a strong ethics without religion, I would immediately suspect that they have a hidden agenda and are probably hypocritical. I wouldn't trust them. Just like I've always learned to trust people who found their archetype, they live within it, they're immersed with it, which also means they can afford to admire people who have other archetypes, so they're not in a rivalrous relationship to other people. That is a good sign, right? And that also means you get the sexuality in order, so you don't use the sexuality at the forefront like something to compensate for. Right. Something that it's a negation that drives you and overrides anything else you say or do. Meaning that you say something, you probably mean it when you say it, but sexual temptation comes along into the room and suddenly you betray your best friend. That's precisely why I don't trust people who fix their sexuality. So I think that's a good part with spirituality, is to fix these things, but not for you to self-transcend in front of yourself, but rather to transcend in the sense that you become a person who can actually interact with the people in a solid, trustworthy way.
So are you saying that somebody, I would say, who overemphasizes his or her sexuality and puts it on a pedestal in a kind of way, like that is an indicator for not having embodied their own archetype?
It could be. Yeah, like anything people overdo, it's usually a signal that some kind of compensational behavior is going on.
Right.
But hey, if I'm going to see a good sex worker, and buy sexual services, I would expect them to be pretty obsessed with sex, right? Like a doctor is obsessed with curing bodies that are
right
to make them healthy.
Mm.
I mean, that's just professionalism, and I love professionalism. Two things I love: professionalism.
But we're not talking about professionals. We're talking about compensative behavior.
Yeah, if they are compensative. So I would perfectly well allow a person to be obsessed with sex and talk about sex all the time and be immersed in it. And if they hang out with other people who share that interest, especially, but obviously if you walk into a room and the other people are just sick and tired of sex, so you can't stop talking about it, and just being an arrogant bastard.
Right.
That's not very spiritual.
Right.
Again, context is everything when it comes to spirituality. So your intention is probably to go from a certain point A that you can specify to a certain point B. And the point B is something you believe you can achieve, but it's quite a challenge to get there. Meaning you probably need help from others to get there, which is wonderful because it means you actually open yourself up to the people and say that I want to go from point A to point B. I've set this out as my spiritual goal. I know it's a tough challenge. Some of you might be skeptical that I could ever achieve it. But if I can get your help, I will do my utmost. And that's exactly people around you would just go, wonderful. Yeah, let's do it. What can I do for you? How can I support you towards that achievement? For example, you come into the room and said, I'm going to go to higher education. I'm going to take this college class or go to university and take a PhD. And people say, that's quite a challenge. But yeah, you're great at that. You'd be good at that. How can I support you? Right? That's when you're in your element. That's when you found your own personal essence in an Aristotelian sense. And I think that's a really good place to start to unify religion and spirituality so they become one and the same thing. And maybe we could then allow the word spirituality as is used today in contemporary language to be the more feminine aspect of the same thing, of the same coin, where the other side of the coin is called religion. I would never use spirituality without religion. I would never use ethics without religion. I just don't trust people who refuse to take the word religion in their mouths because I think they cannot be trusted.
Okay, now let us get back all to the beginning of this conversation, namely digital libido and how our understanding of spirituality and finding the archetype or the personal algorithm, all the words we use, like how does it play out in the internet age? Like how could we use internet to enact our algorithm and our archetype?
Okay. So you and I talked about it before. The algorithm is the machinic phallus. So finally, technology itself has delivered phallus, and that's the algorithm. And of course, we need to watch out so the algorithm doesn't get corrupted by money and it doesn't get manipulated by politics. So if we can keep capitalism and if we can keep politics out of the algorithm, it will be better. Hopefully, we can do that. The personal algorithm then is any algorithm you nurture and you create through interacting with a certain technology. So you interact with a certain web browser, you will discover that the web browser will create a personal algorithm for you. So it will tip you about certain things in which direction you should go. And here it's important to take on challenges. And again, we can go back to how you find your own archetype. Your own archetype is something you do with ease.
Exactly.
Yes, but you can still perfect it. And the wonderful thing when you start perfecting it is you become the real expert at it. Right. So you're no longer just promising, you're no longer just running fast because you were the kid who ran fast at school, but you become an Olympic gold medalist at running, right? So that's the benefit of putting an effort into something you already do at ease and have the talent for, is that you become really world-class at it. And that's, of course, any human being can do that with something. They always love doing that. So that's when we excel as humans, when we do that. That's brilliance, basically, or genius, or daemon, as you call it too. Right. So if you get a chance to do that, do it, definitely. But then you're on that path to do exactly that. let me see if I can bring that back to the topic. Where are we at? You came back to where we started.
Exactly. No, I was just
where we started.
I was just wondering how spirituality ties in with our understanding of of our internet age and how we have to deal with it.
Okay, yeah, great. So if the algorithm is a technological phallus, that means it's a grown-up thing. Phallus is always grown up. That means the algorithm will plunder and go through the entire internet and will expose the truth about what's going on out there, and then will reflect it back at us. So if you challenge yourself, you are in your own archetypal mode, and you challenge yourself to be as good as you can at that, you will automatically get a personal algorithm and any technology you use that points you towards what you can study deeper, or the friends you could make, or the arenas you could perform in, or the jobs that will be available to you. So what the internet does is that it makes the world available to you so that when you excel at what you're really good at and you find a pride in exploring your own archetype, then the world will be made accessible to you. So technology will meet you. This is what we call the Messiah machine. The Messiah will finally arrive. It can sort out this chaos for us and create order in the chaos of the world today, so we can have order again. But it will require one thing of you. It will require that you're a grown-up. Right. So if your parents told you can do anything you want, and you grew up in this sort of overprotected world where, everything was safe, and you weren't told the truth out there because you might get offended if you heard it. If you live in this overprotective, infantilizing environment your entire life, and you then meet the internet as where it's going, digital in the 2020s, you probably find it shocking the algorithm will challenge you in the first place. And what you will then do is you lock up, and you will only look for people who reinforce your prejudices and the people who will not challenge you in any way whatsoever. And that's what we call the echo chamber. Right. And we discovered in the 2010s was that a society full of echo chambers was disastrous for us. But what I would say is that we also then discovered that people who go into these and lock themselves into these echo chambers will be the new underclass. So yeah, if you want to be a loser in the digital age, you want to be a loser in the informationalist society, then sure, go ahead. Just find the people who agree with you at all the times. Never challenge yourself. Don't even go looking for your archetype. Just go looking for anything, the laziest, shortest route to anything. Right. And then just try to milk somebody for resources you can survive, and do that. And be in a mortido rather than a digital libido. You stay in within the digital death drive, you become the underclass. But you could also see the fantastic opportunities in contemporary society that are now available to us through the algorithms, when you can foster and live with your algorithm as your own personal guardian angel, so that it guides you, by doing these calculations of billions of amounts of data your brain could never go through, and then provides to you your next challenge, your next deep study, your next friend to make, your next partner to meet, your next job to apply to, your next place to move to. And you become a global nomad. And in this sense, you can travel anywhere in the world. You start speaking fluently several languages, and you make friends around the world that really engage with you. And some of these friends are, of course, friends that exactly match you when it comes to archetype. So right. You can do things together with them. Or they're just people who don't have your archetype at all, but that's when you start admiring them, like we do with the genders, like a man admires a woman. You admire people for being different from you, and that's exactly why you go into those relationships.
Right.
I think we can develop a really rich world here of constant interaction with one another and with the machines that will benefit some. And the word for those people who get this, who get the game, is the netocrats. Right. That was the first book 20 years ago. We sort of painted this out. And we call them informationalists, we call them sensocrats, and we call them experimentalists in the new book. So we have a wide variety of people who have netocratic behavior, and that's being reinforced by having a netocratic attitude to that behavior. And that's precisely people who find just the best and most wonderful friends they could make in the world, wherever they live, and socialize with them. And then they see the machines the same way. Why don't I make my machine my best friend? What would a great friend be who is into technology? Well, he would be a guy who constantly challenges me to improve myself, and not just improve myself, but to find context where I can make some meaning out of my self-improvement.
Great.
I think it's a radical break with Cartesian individualism we see ahead of us, right? So this is the major break, and that's exactly what you and I are opposed to spirituality as a kind of personal commercial exercise, but we're deeply engaged with the spirituality of finding your place in the world, your place in the congregation, your place in the community to then thrive and use technology to do it.
Amazing.
That's digital libido. Yeah, that's digital libido.
That's a perfect final word on this episode. Alexander, thank you a lot for doing this.
Love you to bits, Tom. Thank you.
Was great.